Hello students, welcome to chapter 2 of intermediate microeconomics. Okay, eco 302, right? Okay. So this is the basics of supply and demand. In this chapter we will study. You may know many of these things from before, from previous classes, right? So here is the chapter outline. Okay, so first we will learn about demand supply. We will define law of demand, law of supply, right? And then find out the equilibrium, bring them together and study the equilibrium and see how the equilibrium system with the demand supply will adjust and give us equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. And once we learn that, we will see how this will change from a new equilibrium to from an old equilibrium to a new equilibrium, right? You know that when demand or supply curves shift, then we will go to a new equilibrium. We will study in the third topic of the chapter. We study the adjustment process. Then in the fourth topic we study elasticity, right? So we will define elasticity and study different types of elasticity for both price elasticity of supply and price elasticity of demand. Then we discuss the long run and short run elasticity. See, elasticity is the price will adjust to a change in either demand or supply will be different in short run than it will adjust in the long run. So we will discuss that. Then the next topic is we will understand and predict the effects of changing market condition. So we will see when the underlying market conditions change, we will identify those factors and we will see when those conditions change, the factors change, how 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 we can explain that, and also we will try to predict that. And the last topic is the effects of government intervention, price controls, like, right, this is like price controls, like price floor or price ceiling. How will those affect equilibrium? So let us so this one is supply demand analysis. So this is we call the market model, right? Market equilibrium model. Demand analysis is the fundamental and powerful tool that can be applied to a wide variety of interesting and what important problems, which is expected, right? This demand supply demand analysis will tell us how we get equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity of a commodity, and also that how that will change. The model will also tell us how things will change over time as the different determinants that are behind supply and demand changes. So here they give some example, understanding and predicting how changing world economic conditions, right, affect price and production. So let us say there is economic growth worldwide, right? Income worldwide, GDP is increasing. So how will that affect the demand and supply for a product, and how that change in demand and supply will in turn affect price and production of the commodity. Then we will evaluate the impact of government price controls, as we said, price floors and price ceilings. Then minimum wages, right? Minimum wage, remember, government set the minimum wage per hour for workers to help them earn a decent living, right? Sometimes employer do not want to give high wage, so the government will step in. So, but there are some unintended consequences of minimum wage also. Some people say minimum wage may create unemployment, because when wage increases, hiring workers become more expensive. So employers may then hire less worker. So some people unemployed may find it difficult to get a job. And then price supports. So these are price supports, right? Price floors, we call them. And then this sometimes it is that price of some commodities is too low, and then the government may take a step to increase price to help the producers. and in other times government may give production incentive, right, subsidy, some kind of subsidy to the producers so that they are encouraged to produce more. uh, then we can also study these production incentives with the help of our demand supply model. Then determining the how taxes, subsidies, tariffs, and import quotas affect consumers and producers, right? So time to time, the government may impose tax on consumers, right, or give subsidy to the producers, like this is like production incentive, and or impose tariff, right? Tariff. This also can be production incentive, because when the government impose tariff on imported goods, then local domestic producers may see that price of the good in question will increase in the home country market, and that helps producers to produce, domestic producers to produce more. Tariff is not good for import. It will carve import, but it will help the producers by increasing domestic price of the product. Then import quotas, right? For some commodities there are import quotas. There are a certain amount, physical units that will be allowed for to be imported, right? So these are import quotas. So, and we will discuss the effect, or we can discuss the effect of such import quotas on consumers and producers within the framework of this market model, demand supply analysis. So let us discuss first. The first thing we want to discuss is the supply curve. Supply curve shows us the relationship between price of a commodity and how much the producers want to offer for sale, right? So producers, they have resources, and with the help of technology they will produce goods and offer for sale, but the amount they want to offer for sale depend on this price. So see, quantity supplies depend on price of the product. It also depends on certain other items such as technology, such as cost of raw materials, and what number of producers. But the main determinant of supply is what? Price. So the supply curve, this shows us the relationship between quantity of a good that is the producers are willing to sell, right? The producers have to be willing and what? Able able to sell for, and then the price of the given the price of the good. So look at that here. When price is P1, producers want to supply Q1 on this S supply curve, see. And then when price is P2, on the same S supply curve, producers want to supply this amount. This is the amount. So here it will be, right. So the supply curve labeled S in the figure shows how the quantity of good offered for sale changes as price of the product changes. See, so how the supply will change, increase or decrease when price increases or decreases. And this is an upslope line, and we know that law of supply tells us that what? That when supply price goes up, supply will increase, given that these other factors that also affect supply remain fixed, right? So we call that assumption, all these we call non-price determinants of supply. Non-price determinants of supply. So we will keep all of them fixed as we study the relationship between price and quantity supply. So when price increases, profit increases, producers want to supply more. And on the other hand, so if price up arrow price increases, that means producers will supply more, right? And if price decreases, producers will supply less. That is law of supply. The supply curve is upward sloping because, as we said, these two are what? These two are direct. There is a direct relationship between this. when we assume no the other factors like cost of production, like number of producers, like technology remain unchanged. Given that these all of these remain unchanged, we call this ceteris paribus, right? Remember, this is a Latin phrase, and this one means what? Other things remaining unchanged, as we study the effect of price on quantity supplied. The higher the price, the more the so let us see, upward slope means what? The higher the price, the more the farms are willing and able. So if price is higher, price increases P2 to P1, supply will increase from what? From this from this one, from here to Q1. See that along the same supply curve, right? If the production cost falls, so you see cost of production, this is one of the factors that also one of the non-price determinants, right? And if this one falls, farms can produce the same quantity at a lower price, or a larger quantity at the same price. As a result, the supply curve then shift to the right from S1 to S2. If cost of production increases, then at the same price, you can check now all this price, producers now want to supply more than before. uh, this will also happen if there is an improvement in technology improvement. So you see, when there is technological improvement, what happened? Profit of the producers will increase, and as a result, at the same price, they now want to produce more. Or if there is number of producers, these are some other factors that also affect supply besides price. If number of producers in the market increase, what happens? For every price, then the new producer supply will be added to the existing producer supply, so supply will increase. So in all of these cases, what happened? In all of these cases, the supply curve will increase and the supply curve will shift from S to S prime. And as a result, look at that. For the same price here, P1, for the same price, then supply is increasing from Q1 to Q2. Also for the same P2 price, supply will increase. See that? Okay. So let us say this we call this Q1 prime. From Q1 prime to Q1. See? Now on the other hand, we can say that when will the supply curve shift to the left? If supply increases, right? So quantity supplied increases, the supply curve will shift to the right. But now if we know that if production cost increases, right, or if number of producers decreases, or if there is technology goes backward, right, in case of natural disaster or war, so then the quantity supply down arrow decreases, and for all price now producers want to supply less, right? So all this price producers now want to supply less, so excuse me, so the entire supply curve will then shift to the left, to a point such as S double prime, for example, right? So here this is the new supply. Let us say this is Q2, Q3, right? So you see supply, when supply goes left, supply is decreasing. Now other variables that affect supply, the quantity that producers are willing to sell depend not only on the price they receive, but also on their production cost, right? Including wages, interest, charges, and the cost of raw materials. So these are the three different components of cost. And when any of these components change, the cost will change. And as we have seen in the previous slide, the supply curve will shift. Now, if cost of production increases, supply will shift to the right, supply will increase. If cost of production decreases, but all the other factors remain unchanged, remember ceteris paribus, the supply curve will shift to the left. When production costs decrease, in output increases no matter what the market price happen to be. As we said, for any different price, you see that when the cost decreases there is an increase in supply, though the supply curve will shift, so the supply curve will shift to the right. And if on the other hand vice versa, alternate is true. If supply cost production cost increases, the supply curve will then shift to the left, right? This is we also explained this one from S to shift from S to S2 in the previous slide. Economists often use the phrase change in supply to refer to the shifts of the supply curve, while reserving the phrase change in quantity supplied to apply to movements along the same supply curve. So see, this is just as we have discussed. If we just make a quick sketch here, this is quantity supplied, zero, and price, and this is the supply curve. See, supply curve. So if price increases and the supply increases as a result of that, see, P1 to P2, price increases, supply increases from Q1 to Q2. This we call is change in quantity supplied, because here supply increasing from Q1 to Q2 because of an increase in price. On the other hand, if supply increases because the entire supply curve shift from S to S1, or so supply increases or supply decreases, right? S to S2. Now look at that, for S1, for the same price P2, supply is now higher here, Q2 prime. So supply is increasing from Q1 to Q2 prime. All that because of what? Because of that shift in supply curve from S to S1. This can be because of, as we said, a decrease in production cost, and this increase from Q1 to Q2 prime we call what? Change in supply, right? It's a supply can decrease also, as we have explained in the previous slide. Now the next thing we want to discuss is the demand curve, demand relationship, right? Demand curve shows us the demand relationship. So it will show us the quantity of a good that consumers are willing to buy and the price of the good. So that is the relationship. So we have quantity demanded plotted on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis, and look, demand now depend on what? Price of the product. See that? So this is P1. So this is okay. So when price is P1, demand for the product is Q1. See, the demand curve labeled D here, label D, shows how the quantity of good demanded by consumer depends on its price. So at price P1, demand is Q1. See, the demand curve is downward sloping. It is downward sloping, so this one is going down as we move to the start from the origin and go to the right, holding other things equal. So remember ceteris paribus, this holding other things equal is the ceteris paribus assumption. This tells us that demand depend on, not just on price but on other factors also, like what? Like number of consumers, then price of other goods, price of other goods, then what? Then income. For some goods, when income increases, people buy more, and there are others also. So we hold all of these unchanged, right? Other things, ceteris paribus, other things unchanged, and we call this list we call non-price determinants of demand. So here, if when all of these remain unchanged, then law of demand tells us that if price increases, then what? Quantity demanded will decrease, and if price decreases, quantity demanded will increase, and vice versa. See that? Consumers So there is this inverse relationship, right? This is because if price increase of some good increases, consumers will then switch to other goods, or if price of some goods increases, consumers will see that their real income has decreased. As a result, they will buy less. So see, so hence this inverse relationship. Given that the ceteris paribus hold, the quantity demanded may also depend on other variables such as income, weather, and the prices of other goods, right? Weather also is important, right? So in summer, there is high demand for lightweight, light colored dress. But in winter, there is no demand for those dresses. In winter, because of the low temperature, people want to wear overcoat and heavy garments with dark color. See, so demand depend on weather also. For most products, the quantity demanded increases when income rises as people. So you see, look at that. When income increases, people want to buy more, right? And vice versa for most products, right? But there are some goods that we call inferior goods. Inferior goods. For inferior goods, when income increases, people buy less. So these are some some cheaper brand goods, right? Like ramen noodles, right? Canned tuna, and like many people say, like in vegetables, cabbage, right? But when people income increase, they will switch to more expensive goods, like restaurant meal, like luxury cars, right? And etc. So this is the demand. When demand increases, when price does not change, but one of these non-price determinant, anyone, such as let us say income increases, and this we call a normal good, right? This we call a normal good. So when what happens when income increases, let me put an up arrow, demand will increase. See, quantity demanded, up arrow means increase. So at any price, people now want to what? They now want to buy more. So demand will increase from D to D prime. On the other hand, if income decreases, right? If income decreases at any price, people want to buy less. Look, price does not change. As we are considering studying the effect of income, of a decrease in income on demand. In that case, what happened? In that case, we know that demand will decrease, right? And then the entire demand curve will shift to the left. And you can see that in that case, if this is the demand curve D double prime, right? And then this is what? Q 2 prime double prime. So demand has decreased. Price doesn't change, but demand has decreased because of lower income. See, alternately, a change in any other of these factors, that non-price determinant, will shift the demand curve. If demand increases, curve will shift to the right. If demand decreases, demand curve will shift to the left. Now, shifting the demand curve. If the market price were held constant at P1, we would expect to see an increase in the quantity demanded, say from Q1 to Q2, as a result of higher consumer income. See, so so price is P1 fixed, and what happened? Demand curve goes from D to D prime, shifts, right? Because why? Why is demand increasing here? Because of higher income, right? Income increasing, and this is a normal good, right? So this is like a gas grill, expensive grill. So and many people say charcoal grill is an inferior good. So when people income is low, they use charcoal grill, but when their income increase, they will switch to gas grill. See, now substitute and complementary goods. So let us discuss this. Substitutes. Two goods for which an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the quantity demanded of the other. See, substitutes is what? These goods are interchangeable. One used instead of the other. Like what? like Coke versus Pepsi, right? So if price of Coke increases, Coke become more expensive, many people will then switch to Pepsi, right? When we go to the grocery store, we are always looking for deals. So we see that if some week price of Coke increases, people will then switch to Pepsi. So the demand for Pepsi, see, will increase. Is that okay? And on the other hand, what are complementary goods? These are goods that are used together, like DVD player and what DVD. If price of DVD player decreases, if this become cheaper, people buy more DVD player, then they will also buy more DVD. So demand for DVDs will depend on the price of the DVD player, right? So these complements the two goods for which an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the excuse me quantity demanded of the other, and vice versa, right? So let us now talk about the market mechanism, the market model, right? This is where we find the equilibrium, price and quantity. We already developed supply and demand, so let us bring them together. This is the upward sloping supply curve, the red one. This is the downward sloping demand curve, the blue one. We bring them together and we see that here they intersect. At that point of intersect, we have quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied. So this is a state of rest. We will soon explain why. This is the equilibrium price P0 and equilibrium quantity Q0, right? So that happens when they are this demand supply equal to one another, right? Now what about P1? For this P1, that price, look at that. That is away from the equilibrium, higher than the equilibrium, right? Equilibrium is P0 here, demand equal to supply, but at P1 we have supply increase, supply is high but demand is low. Look at all of this. This is quantity supplied higher than quantity demanded at that higher price P1. So this one says that producers, they want to, at that high price, they want to produce a lot, but buyers, they do not want to buy, right? So hence the horizontal difference between the supply curve and the demand curve. So producers are stuck, they cannot sell what they have produced. So to get rid of this surplus, then what happens, they have to reduce price. See that, as they reduce price to encourage people to buy more, look at the horizontal distance between those two curves becoming a smaller until when we fall back from P1 to P0, the demand equal to supply and the surplus is completely eliminated. So we have this equilibrium. Equilibrium we call comes from the Latin word equilibria. Equilibria, and this tells us what? A state of rest, right? Once we achieve this equilibrium, P0, demand equal to supply, once price has fallen back from P1 to P0, right? Demand equal to supply, there is no more surplus and no pressure for price to fall any further. At any price higher than P0 here, there will be a pressure of surplus pushing down the price, right? Okay. Now what about shortage? Here, price suppose P2, and here P2 price is so low, consumers want to buy a lot, but producers, when price is low, producers profit is also low, so they don't want to produce a lot. See, so there is a big difference between what producers want to produce, quantity demanded greater than what? Quantity supplied, right? Quantity demanded greater than quantity supplied. So we have all of this, right? Okay. And then in this case, what happens? Now consumers are unhappy, they want to buy but producers not producing enough, so they will bid against one another, consumers bid against one another and increase price. And as price continues to increase, adjust from P2 to P0, what happens? Look at that horizontal difference between the demand and supply is what? Supply will decrease, right? And as price goes from P0 to P2 to P0, then what happens? We return to the equilibrium again, to that intersection, right? Okay, so that we have. And then when as long as demand is higher than supply, as long as we are any point below that P0 equilibrium, there will be pressure on price to increase. But the moment we achieve that P0, that equilibrium, the shortage is completely eliminated. See, demand equal to supply, there is no more shortage here. Again we have a state of rest. So we say that equilibrium is market clearing, because at that equilibrium price, the amount the consumers want to buy, demand, is exactly equal to the amount consumers want to sell, supply, right? Price that equates the quantity supplied to the quantity demanded, we call equilibrium. Now, market mechanism, tendency in a free market for price to change until the market clears. See that? So that adjustment, as time goes by, see, if we go to the previous slide, as time goes by, the market may what? Fluctuate within this surplus and shortage, until we gradually achieve P0, right? The equilibrium. Uh, so this is market mechanism, tendency for a free market for price to change until the market clears, right? Demand equal to supply, we have equilibrium. Surplus, this is a situation in which quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. QS is higher than quantity demanded, so we are above the equilibrium price. So there will be pressure on price to decrease, right? On the other hand, shortage, as we have described in the previous slide, right? Demand is higher than supply. So consumers will bid against one another, right? And then there will be pressure on price to increase. So this one will happen below any price, below the equilibrium price. We have shortage, and there is pressure on price to increase. Any price be above the equilibrium price, there will be a shortage, and there will be pressure on price to decrease until we adjust to the until equilibrium price, where the market clear, neither shortage nor surplus, right? So this one, demand, quantity demanded equal to quantity supplied, neither shortage nor surplus. So let us see what is going on. When can we use the supply demand model? We are assuming that at any given price, a given quantity will be produced and sold. This assumption makes sense only if market is at least roughly competitive. By this we mean that both sellers and buyer would have little market power, right? Roughly competitive means that there is for the both sellers, buyers, they don't have what? Sellers don't have ability to charge higher price, and buyers also do not have ability to change price, right? So market power means the ability of the agents, participants in the market, right? Constituents of the market, the ability of those constituents to change price. When there is little ability of those participants in the market, constituents of the market, to change price, we call that what? Competitive. In a non-competitive environment such as monopoly, there is just one producer, and he knows his monopoly position. So he knows that even if he is charging higher price, consumers have no choice but to buy from him, and then he will do what? Charge higher price. But in a competitive market, that is not. There are many producers and there are many sellers. So there is little market power for anyone, little ability individually to affect the market price, right? So there are so many buyers, sellers, that alone each individual unit cannot, what? Buyer or seller cannot really affect market price. Suppose instead that supply were controlled by a single producer, a monopolist, right? So this is what in case of Louisiana, New Orleans metropolitan area, it is Entergy. One example, right? But this is a public monopoly, and we will study that later on. Entergy is what they are the only producer of power, and they know that, and so so they can try to use their dominant their unique position in the market, right? Market to what charge higher price on the consumer and extract profit from them, right? That is why these are public monopolies. So government entity has to deal make agreement with the government about how much price they want to charge, because if there is no government intervention involvement, then they may charge too much because they have market power. If the demand curve shifts in a particular way, it may be the monopolist's interest to keep the quantity fixed but change the price, or keep the price fixed and change the quantity. So this we will so see, because of his monopoly position, the monopolist, he is always in a position to what, take advantage of changes in the demand curve, and what he will do to get maximum benefit out of such a change is what, such a shift of the demand curve depends on how the curve is shifting. Now changes in the equilibrium, here we study how do we adjust from an old equilibrium to a new equilibrium. Suppose this demand, the blue curve, and S is this is red supply curve, and this is the equilibrium P1 Q1. And now there is, suppose cost of technology decreases, or there is what, technological innovation. See that, remember ceteris paribus, remember the non-price determinants of supply. Suppose one of those non-price determinants change, now the others remain fixed and price remain fixed. So now we know that when the supply curve shifts to the right, supply will increase, right? So then when the cost of product, excuse me, when cost of production decreases, quantity supply will increase, and as a result, supply curve will go from S to S prime. And look at the new equilibrium now. At the new equilibrium, new intersection between the old demand curve, nothing happened to the old demand remained fixed, but the supply shift, supply increase, supply shift to the right. So at the new price will decrease from P1 to P2, and supply and quantity supplied will increase from Q1 to Q2. See that? So that is one example. We can show you another example. Suppose we have another supply curve here, and this is what is double prime, this one, right? So here we have what, this is P2, right? Supply has now decreased for any reason, and then what happens, look, now this is Q4, and let us make it Q2, right? So price will now increase, and demand equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price will increase, equilibrium quantity will now decrease, right? What about this one, the new equilibrium following a shift in the demand? Here we say that supply remain fixed, that red one, but demand is blue one initially. And then what happened, this is the old equilibrium, right? Old, let me write. And then what happens, suppose there is a change in the one of the non-price determinants, right? So income increases, and this is a normal good. So we know that demand for the product at any price, as we have discussed, demand will be higher, and as a result, demand curve will what, demand curve will shift up, demand increases, demand curve will shift to the right, and this the now the new equilibrium. Look, now at the new equilibrium, because that higher demand curve shift from D to D prime, what happened, price increases P1 to P3, quantity increases Q1 to Q3. That so that is the thing. And now you can easily experiment. Let us say that for some reason demand has decreased, right? We go from D to D double prime. Then look at that. This is the new equilibrium, right? So this will be P2, and this will be what? And this will be P2, and this will be what? And this will be Q2, right? P1 to P2, Q1 to Q2. See that? So this actually this was the old, right? And this is the new. This is one new equilibrium here. This one is another new equilibrium. Just so you see, these adjustments are continuous. They are taking place every day, every hour in the commodity market. Demand supply for apples, demand supply for oranges, demand supply for gasoline. You name the product, right? Continuously there is adjustment, right? So new equilibrium following shifts in the demand and supply. Here we want to show you what will happen. How will things change? Right? How will equilibrium price change when demand supply both change? In here, look, this is the old equilibrium, right? That is the on the old demand curve and old supply curve, right? D and S. Now let us say that, and this is old quantity P1 and Q1 or initial quantity, right? Now what happens? Now let us say supply increases from S to S prime, demand increases also. So quantity supply is increasing, quantity demand is also increasing. But look at the size of the shift. See, demand increase much more than the supply, and as a result, what happened? We can see that the new equilibrium will move from that to D prime S prime, right? And so this is E equilibrium, E1 equilibrium, and this is what? E2 equilibrium, right? And as a result, what happens? Equilibrium, and as a result, what happens is that at the new equilibrium, price is P2 and quantity is Q2. See that? That one. Now here the situation is tricky. See, as we said, so we see that here price increase and quantity also increase when demand and supply both shift to the right. Now this is okay. This will always happen when demand supply both shift to the right. Quantity will always increase, but price may not always increase. In here, as we were saying, demand shift. Look at the size of the shift in the demand, horizontal shift, right? Demand shift more than supply. As a result, price increased, right? If on the other hand, supply shift more than demand, so supply, let us say, shift all the way up to this S double prime, not from S to S prime, goes all the way S to S double prime. Now look at the size of the shift. That shift is now what? Much bigger than the shift of the demand curve, right? So this shift is bigger than this one, right? It's not apparent because I am not drawing to scale. I'm just quickly sketching, right? So in that case, this is the new equilibrium E3, right? And you will see that quantity will still increase from Q1 to Q3, but look at the new equilibrium price, P3. P3. So from if supply goes from S to S double prime to the right, and demand goes to right from D to D prime, and now supply shift more than the demand. As a result, now equilibrium price will fall from P1 to P3. See that? Equilibrium quantity will still increase Q1 to Q3. In both from from S to S prime or S to S double prime, you see quantity increases, but price will behave in a different way. So this really, what happens to price really depend on what? On the size of the shift of the demand and supply curve. If demand shift more than the supply, price will increase. If demand shift less than the supply, if supply shifts more, then price will decrease at the new equilibrium. New equilibrium price will be lower, right? So in general, changes in price and quantity depend on the amount by which each curve shifts and the shape of each curve. So here they give an example. Uh, so we discuss this in the next slide.